All right, this is the first lecture in our new unit called Absolutism. The first section of notes is entitled Spain's Empire and European Absolutism. So let's go through this. This is a picture of Charles V. So after the fall of Rome, there was no king who had any territory of significance since Charlemagne, and he was able to accomplish that by having a pretty sizable kingdom. Take a look at that real quick. Before we get to that, let's look at a couple of definitions. This is a definition for both of our vocab words, but this is the first one, absolute monarch or absolutism. So an absolute monarch is a ruler who ruled with unrestricted authority over the lives of his subjects. Hence the absolute part, absolute authority over the lives of his subjects. And we're going to see a lot of kings of this type in this unit, which is going to lead to, as you would probably expect from the people under them, a form of rebellion in the next unit. Another principle that was closely associated with absolute monarchy is this idea of the divine right of kings. And that states, this is a principle that stated that the monarch was appointed by God and therefore not subject to earthly authority. You can imagine if your leaders all of a sudden said that, well, God put me here, so I don't have to do anything any of you say. All I have to do is what God tells me to do. And that's very open-ended and ripe for abuse, which a lot of these absolute monarchs did abuse that principle. Now, let's look at this map of Charles's territory. It's pretty big there. So minus the France part, this isn't his, but this giant chunk of land here is his. All this area here and this area here. So pretty big deal. Once he accomplished this great task, he actually divided his empire between his brother, who got Austria, this sort of chunk over here, and his son, who got this chunk here, and all their colonies in the New World. But we're not writing that down. That's just some background information. All right, this territory, this chunk of Spain here, continued to grow after the reign of Charles V. They added, here's Spain, they added this chunk right here. You may recognize that by today. That's the country of Portugal. So I didn't write it down. I hope you recognize it. The country of Portugal was added to the territory of Spain. All right, Spain was the leading country in the world at this time, 15 to 1700s about, because of their wealth, closely aligned with the church. They were the strongest Catholic country in the world. But the main reason for their wealth was this. These are all colonies that were established by the Spanish in the New World. You know, it started with Columbus, who came over and made a claim in this area. And then it grew from there as other explorers came and claimed different parts. And pretty soon it was this entire area. And the Spanish made a lot of money exporting gold and silver out of this territory back to Spain to add to their treasuries. So that's where their wealth came from, in a sense. All right, as the Spanish grew, as they led the world, they decided that as the leading Catholic country in the world, they would defend Catholicism against threats to it, like Protestantism, or countries that embraced Protestantism. So, Philip II, son of Charles V, engaged in some religious wars. He decided to send his army north up to England. England was the country, after all, that kind of spit in the eye of the Pope and rejected Catholicism and embraced Anglicanism and never went back. And the Spanish had this amazing armada, which is a bunch of ships, giant ships, intimidating ships. So they sent their fleet up there to attack the English. In addition to that, Queen Elizabeth at the time had been secretly commissioning English sailors to hit and run Spanish colonies in the New World. So it was a little bit of religious motivation, a little bit of political motivation to go back and attack the English. So England is where Philip II defended Protestantism, or defended Catholicism against Protestantism. All right, what happened here, though? There's England. This is kind of an example. You've got the very large Spanish ship in the middle here, the intimidating large Spanish ship, but these smaller English ships were able to circle around and outmaneuver the bigger Spanish ships, and also the English Channel where they did this fighting. If we go back for a second, the English Channel, the water around England is notoriously shallow, not good for a big heavy ship. And the English were actually able to defeat the Spanish Armada. It's one of those David and Goliath stories that happened in history. But the result up here of the Spanish losing to the English, their Spanish Armada, was that they didn't have a navy that could help control their colonies in the New World. That's why other countries hadn't stolen territories from them, because the Spanish Navy was so strong. Nobody had a chance. But now they got defeated by a smaller, supposedly inferior enemy, the English, and they're vulnerable. Another thing that's kind of interesting, if we take event to event to event back to today, after the Spanish were weakened in the New World, that gave other countries an opportunity to plant territories in the New World, like the English. And a group of individuals decided to leave England and create a colony in the New World, whether we're talking about Virginia or Plymouth. And it just so happens that those people came from the only country in Europe that wasn't ruled by an absolute monarch, and they brought those principles of government with them when they founded a new country, and that only was possible because of the English defeat of the Spanish Armada. So there's a close correlation between the United States existing and this event in history. So it's pretty important, especially for Americans. All right, a little bit of Spanish culture here. The really famous Spanish book written at this time is this book called Don Quixote, and this is a satire on chivalry. So chivalry was a quality that was admired during the Middle Ages, and we're past that now. And so it's looking back at it, and you've got two characters that don't fit the profile of a knight and of a companion, and it's kind of making fun of this principle of chivalry. Your knight is too old, your companion's animal is too small. So a couple of examples of this. Apparently, it's kind of a funny novel. One such example is Don Quixote gets all revved up and excited and runs off to challenge an enemy, only to find out that it's a giant windmill and it knocks him off his horse. So, it's sort of making fun of this whole chivalrous idea that existed back in the Middle Ages. And it gives us insight into Spanish literature at the time. All right, so Spanish are doing well, but combine the fact that their armada was defeated and a couple other things are going to cause them to decline in their influence in the world. All right, one such thing, they found a lot of these. They brought a lot of these back from the New World. Actually, they borrowed without asking a lot of gold from the New World, and they added that to their treasuries. So a couple of things that caused financial problems for the Spanish, which is inflation, is the one in particular right now, is at this time, because their wealth is increasing, the average lifestyle of Spanish people is increasing. They're having more food, so they can live longer lives, so they can have more kids. But that population increase also affected the price of food. More people, about the same amount of food, so now the food prices go up because it's a scarcity. And demand has gone up. Also, they imported a ton of silver from the New World that made them very, very wealthy. But there's a fine line between even something like silver that's intrinsically valuable just because of what it is. When there's too much of it, the price for it decreases. Okay? Like, people don't kill each other on Black Friday for an item that there's 20 of on the shelf. When there's only one, then death occurs. So the same sort of principle in a financial sense with Spanish silver. So that started to decrease their influence in the world. Other things that contributed to their financial problems were 1492 was a banner year for the Spanish. It's when they united together. A few other things happened that you may have heard of in 1492. One thing they also did is, up until that point, the Spanish had always fought against the Muslims. It was part of their empire, so they were able to finally push the Muslims completely out of Spain back into North Africa. And while they were at it, they threw in the Jews too, and they chased them all out just because of anti-Semitism that existed in the world, since the beginning of time. And when they did that, though, a lot of these Muslims, a lot of these Jews, they were educated, important contributors to society. They were doctors, lawyers, merchants, things like that. And when they're gone, that's an important part of the society that needs to happen that isn't happening anymore. And their tax system was all screwed up. They taxed the wrong people. They didn't tax the wealthy enough. They taxed the middle class way too much, and so that caused the whole economy to collapse. I'm sure there's a moral there. You tax the middle class too much, and your society will crumble. But we don't need to stay on that. All right, another thing that happened to the Spanish, they had this giant chunk of land that belonged to them that was given to them by Charles V. And in one tiny little chunk here, these people, who are very proud people, decided they didn't want to be part of the Spanish Empire anymore, so they broke free. They took opportunity from the weakness the Spanish was experiencing, and they broke free. And this is the Netherlands. The people from the Netherlands are called Dutch, so that's why I put it in parentheses there. But the Spanish Netherlands broke away and became an independent country. They're also going to start claiming territory in the New World and challenging the Spanish on the sea. So this is a major loss for the Spanish. All right, something that they set up, the Dutch set up, is because they were such good sailors, they set up a business that would help them trade to the east, and this is called the Dutch East India Company, and this was going to be the primary financial means by which the Dutch would trade along trade routes to Asia and the rest of the world.